The Rambo movies are among the most interesting and important movies made in the 80s. They heavily influenced the 80s action genre like no other franchise and changed the way we look at action heroes. Rambo invented a whole range of tropes and storytelling techniques that are still used within the genre. Everyone has heard about Rambo, and the name is often used to describe various things in our daily lives, such as someone being too intense or aggressive. But most people haven't actually seen the movies, and if they did, often by skipping the first one. It comes as a surprising revelation that Rambo First Blood doesn't actually depict a bloodthirsty, hyper-masculine macho machine that kills hordes of enemies, even though that's the cliche idea everyone has when thinking or describing John Rambo. And while later movies in the franchise definitely leaned heavily into this idea with the character turning into an indestructible badass, it wasn't the case in the first movie. At least not in the way pop culture makes it seem. Out of all the Rambo movies, First Blood is by far the darkest and most depressing one. It deals with PTSD and the extreme depression Vietnam veterans experienced and had to deal with during a time when there was barely any help or treatment for them. The PTSD is never directly discussed, and it never says that Rambo actually has it, but the first minutes make it clear that something is not right about him. He's a loner, a drifter making his way through one small town after the other, never being able to settle down. There is something dark about him. It is strongly implied, however, that he does suffer. This is evident when he is unjustly arrested by a local sheriff's department. They treat him inhumanely, seeing him as a bum and a freeloader, as some saw Vietnam veterans back then. I believe that the movie implies that he has PTSD shortly after he is arrested. First Blood was among the first movies to show such discrimination and treatment against Vietnam veterans. It shows a theme of war veterans returning to a society that often forgets their sacrifices and sometimes even showing hostility towards them. But the interesting part about this is how Rambo is not seeking violence. He does not cause any problems, nor is he being particularly unfriendly or hostile. It's the small town folks, and in particular the sheriff and the deputies, who show aggressiveness towards him. The sheriff drives him out of town because he assumes the worst from a man who fought in the war, and also because he's an asshole that had to fuck around and find out. Such issues weren't widely talked about at the time, even though veteran groups were already trying to change the public's perception on PTSD and its impacts on soldiers. First Blood influenced the discourse massively and brought the issue into the mainstream, as the movie ended up being one of the most successful blockbusters at the time. But even after being bullied, beaten, and chased by cops, and after having a complete mental breakdown, Rambo still refuses to kill any of them and tries to avoid fighting them directly. He hides in the woods and sets mostly non-lethal traps in order to stop his pursuers from getting to him. This is a big difference to how he is depicted in later movies, where he kills hordes of Viet Cong or Soviets without batting an eye. Most people watching First Blood today will be surprised at the lack of violence, especially within a movie that pretty much created an entire genre. Even though back when it came out, it was criticized for being too violent, despite there only being one death, not even caused by Rambo himself. However, the action that is here is not bad by any means. You feel sorry for John, hoping he will manage to make it out and get away from these asshole cops. The entire movie has a very depressing atmosphere that is constantly present. Rambo came home from a war where he experienced pure horrors, only to be treated like an outcast and chased by the people for whom he was led to believe he was making a sacrifice. And now he's alone, hiding in the woods, freezing in the cold winter air, wearing barely anything. You feel sorry for him because none of this happening is his fault, and he does his best to avoid violence even now. But there is also a darker note here, because the sheriff soon realizes that Rambo is not your average fugitive. Even after calling the National Guard and sending armed soldiers after him, it's made very clear that it's not he who is trapped with them in the woods. They are trapped with Rambo. He is the hunter, and he is the one deciding over their lives. The traps he built do not kill anyone, but they easily could have, as a lot of them are extremely violent and painful. It's only due to his goodwill that he did not decide decide to massacre all of these soldiers and deputies. There is a distinct emotional core to the film, and the violence and mayhem is treated in an unpleasant way rather than glorified. For example, when Rambo deals with the police officers pursuing him in the woods, we see exactly how terrified and out of their depth they are in this situation, and while it's not possible to actually be on their side due to the prior rough treatment of Rambo at the police station and them currently being in the finding out phase after fucking around, we don't get any pleasure in their subsequent injuries at his hand. In fact, it is distinctly unpleasant, with the injuries all appearing to be extremely painful. The mood quickly turns into that of a horror slasher rather than an action movie about a one-man army, which wouldn't even be too far off, as the movie is based on a book with the same name. Except in the book, Rambo is anything but peaceful, and once pressed by the police, snaps and goes on a distractive mass-killing rampage. The book character is nowhere near as sympathetic as the one portrayed by Stallone, and could be described as evil and sadistic. However, that's only the case due to his experiences in the war, his PTSD, and the lack of treatment and help that was available. While the movie decided to turn Rambo into a more sympathetic and heroic character, it still has this dark horror atmosphere and spirit. Despite that, First Blood also shows the effects Vietnam had on veterans, not just Rambo fighting the police. The ending scene gives him a touching and heartfelt monologue that is not only brilliantly acted by Stallone, showing off his incredible talent that often got overshadowed by his macho roles. But it also portrays the suffering of soldiers that returned from a war they were told was their duty, only to be treated as outcasts and not able to fit in. During the war, they knew what their job and purpose was, but now they're back with memories and nightmares while the world changed into something they can't recognize or adapt to. The fact that Stallone wrote that scene himself, along with his fantastic acting in it, to me just clearly shows that he has always been a more complex actor than Schwarzenegger and the true winner of their feud, simply based on talent and creativity.
Nothing is over! Nothing! You just don't turn it off! It wasn't my war! You asked me, I didn't ask you! And I did what I had to do to win, but somebody wouldn't let us win!
First Blood Part 2 is where Rambo actually turns into the movie and character most people imagine it is. When in the first movie John tried to be as pacifistic as possible and avoid killing, then in this movie he unleashes the darkness that he was holding back and turns into an unstoppable killing machine. From the first moments it's made clear that the tone here is different and the character has changed. He's going back to Vietnam to help free some American prisoners from the Viet Cong and of course the Soviets. Only this time he has a government issued free pass to take out whoever he has to, however he wants to accomplish the mission. Now, this obviously sounds like any generic 80s action movie, but there's more to First Blood Part 2.
Rambo, what most people call hell, he calls home.
Its influence was a lot bigger than that of the first movie, despite both being considered classics. The second movie has turned into a more iconic movie because at that time, even though hardcore action movies already existed, none of them had this level of action and Reagan-level politics. Both are anti-war movies. Despite Rambo killing and destroying more, it's never shown as a good thing or celebrated. At the time of the release, it was considered just as violent and dark as the first movie, even though story-wise it was a lot weaker. It is iconic because it created the mythos and trope of the lone wolf warrior who runs around without a shirt, hiding in the jungle while ambushing his enemies. It's a genre that Schwarzenegger participated in but did not invent, unlike Stallone. Similar to the origins of the John Rambo character in First Blood, Rambo 2 is not a particularly violent or action-filled movie at the beginning. While the story is not complex or deep, it does have a decent plot filled with betrayal, political commentary, and various other messages.